I'm Libby Sullivan with NYIT, and I'm on the university's Old Westbury, New York campus with Kevin LaGrandeur, a professor specializing in technology and culture with NYIT College of Arts and Sciences. We're here today to have a conversation and discussion about surviving the rise of machines and how the real threat to American jobs is automation, not foreign workers. Kevin had an op-ed published on this topic recently in USA Today and has a book coming out on essentially the same topic. It's out today actually through the Palgrave website, and it's really focusing on intelligent technology and how that is transforming human work. So, welcome Kevin, and thank you. We're going to have a conversation and then we're going to take some questions from the audience, so please put your questions in the comments section and we'll get to them after I start off. So, again, thank you for your time. Your recent op-ed addresses how to survive the rise of machines. Briefly, what does that mean?
Well, machines are taking over more and more jobs over the last decade or decade and a half. In fact, machines have been a bigger job killer in the United States and in Western Europe than anything else, including immigration. Illegal immigrants don't take jobs anywhere near as much as machines, nor does outsourcing. So that's the topic, that machines are really a huge displacer of jobs, and that's becoming worse.
Well, related to that, and a term we've often heard is technological unemployment. Is that what you mean? And if it is, can you expand on that a bit, please?
Yeah, sure. In fact, technological unemployment is the term a lot of academics and business professionals use to describe what's happening, the process I just described of machines displacing workers. And specifically, we're talking about intelligent machines, so artificial intelligence and robots. So technological unemployment is when intelligent technology displaces workers.
So we've seen, this is not the first time we've seen this kind of social change, so to speak, and disruption that has driven social change. What's novel this time around, or is there anything novel compared to what we've seen previously?
Right. Well, this is what most people call the fourth technological revolution, the technology revolution. And the first one was the steam revolution, steam-powered revolution that most of us are familiar with from our history lessons in school. And the big difference between then and now is the speed of transformation. Back when steam allowed weaving looms and locomotives to provide sort of mechanical labor that displaced human labor, there was more time for humans to adjust, because the kinds of progress that happened because of that first industrial revolution was slower than our present digital revolution. The digital revolution is moving fast and getting faster every day. So there's not a lot of time to catch up.
So that's really the biggest change, the speed.
Right, that's
Okay.
the biggest change.
Well, another big change that you mentioned in your op-ed is that 88% of manufacturing job losses over the past few years is a result of decreased demand for human labor. And you cite other professions that are at risk for the same thing. What are some of those, and would people be surprised to hear what some of these jobs are?
Yeah, the surprising thing about job loss is that it's not, unlike previous revolutions, the steam revolution, the electrical revolution, and the automation revolution, which happened in the 1950s through the 70s, with the difference now is the digital revolution, the present one, unlike the previous one, isn't just about robotics, it's about connected robots and connected artificial intelligence. It's the connectivity that really makes the difference now. And anyway, to get back to the question, the surprising thing is it's not just displacing manual labor, which is what the previous revolutions displaced. Mm-hmm. Middle-class jobs are getting displaced, and even more higher-level jobs are getting displaced. For example, accountants are already being displaced by TurboTax. The smarter TurboTax gets, the less we need tax accountants. There's another study about the future of labor. The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the likelihood of certain professions getting displaced in the middle class is really high. Accountants in the next 10 years, have a 98% chance of getting displaced completely by intelligent technology. So do salespeople, especially in retail, and also journalists and technical writers. Journalists already are being displaced at Associated Press International, Associated Press, the famous journalistic providers, are using an artificial intelligence program called WordPress to write financial and sports stories without any kind of human involvement at all, because those types of stories mainly are they mainly have to do with numbers. So sports, you know, how many batters were up, what was the how many innings and so forth. And financial is mostly statistics as well. So the artificial intelligence programs gathers the necessary statistics from available sources and then puts in canned phrases that humans often use. So the stories are very hard to tell the difference between the human stories and the artificial
So readers
intelligence.
can't tell the difference, you think, if a machine wrote it or a person wrote it?
Well, I couldn't until I started experimenting side by side, and the differences are very subtle.
Very interesting. So with these jobs that are going to be going away, which I think is surprising to a lot of people, I find some of this surprising, how can employers or technologists, if these employers would be technologists, how can they responsibly think about the issue of worker displacement before putting like these kinds of products into the world or these kinds of capabilities?
Well, there's not a lot that employers can do about this because capitalism, upon which economic system our country runs, is not made to be a moral system. It's made to be a profit-generating system. So and also employers are going to do what generates profit, and that's natural. So you can't tell scientists to stop making machines that are intelligent and stop improving machines. So really the responsibility of adjusting for all of this falls on society at large and also politicians. And those two areas we need to make adjustments.
Okay. Well, you suggest, again, in your op-ed, some, like those adjustments, you suggest that ways to solve the problem of automation being the real threat to American jobs requires a radically new approach to economic policy. So what kind of reforms exactly are you talking about?
Well, I think first, to be clear, I'm talking about the short term. In the short term, we need radical adjustments because if you look at history, in previous industrial revolutions, for about the first generation after the innovation happens, that is for about the first 25 or 30 years, there's a lot of disruption and dislocation in jobs. But in the long run after that, in the second generation, there are even more jobs generated by the new technology. So in the long run, usually we're okay. But in the short run, we have to do something to compensate because otherwise there will be a lot of violent social disruption, as there was in the past. There'll be a lot of people being put out of work, a lot of people having trouble making ends meet, finding food to put in their mouths, and so forth. So in the short run, some radical things that we could do, but sensible things, would be to institute a universal basic income for everybody, and I can go back to talk about that in detail in a minute. Also, to provide a sort of micro incomes to people to offset their job loss by putting up some micro taxes on some of the new technology in ways that are fair. For instance, right now, Google and Facebook and large corporations, digital corporations, use our data for free. Why not pay us a little bit, pennies or a fraction of a penny each time they use our data to make money for themselves? That helps us benefit from their profits. And this is already being done in Alaska with the oil companies. In Alaska, everybody at the end of the year gets a payment from the oil company based on their profits by using their land in Alaska. So this, there's already precedent for this. The third and fourth things are a shorter work week, which is already being done in Sweden, and there's some really good studies on that show profitability doesn't decrease when people get fewer hours. And then the last thing would be Bill Gates' recommendation, actually, which is to institute a robot tax on companies that heavily use robots, so heavily that they get rid of a lot of workers.
I want to go back to something you said before. You said that these were radical yet sensible ideas, and that seems a little contradictory potentially. So how do you respond to critics of such proposals, and also the shorter work week? This is, I guess, a two-part question, but how do you respond to that? And the shorter work week, do companies make less money, and do employees make less money?
Well, the shorter work week, the way they're doing it in Sweden, which is the right way, is that the Swedish companies in the studies that they're doing reduce everybody's work week to 30 hours a week. And then they hire more workers to fill in for the work that's left open because of the employees having less time on the job. So it does two things. It reduces the work hours of the present employees, but also instigates more hiring, which is a way to offset job loss from automation. Now, the obvious question here is how do they make money? How does the corporation make a profit? Well, the study finds that the reduction in work hours and adding additional employees doesn't lose the company money. In fact, either the profit stays the same or they make more money because the workers are less stressed, they work harder, and they're more efficient on the job. And then you pay them the same amount of money, so it does cost more to hire the extra workers, but that extra cost is offset by the efficiencies of those workers that are hired.
So that's why it's radical and sensible, both.
Yes, based on what's happening in Sweden, it is.
Okay.
I should say that there's some American companies trying this. Amazon is the most notable one, but they're not doing it the same way, and it's not going to work if they don't switch the way they do it, I don't think. Right now, Amazon is cutting back the work week for some of their employees rather than all of them, and they're cutting back on their pay as well. The employees are not going to be happy to be paid less, and other employees who see them working less will get disgruntled as well. That's what happened in the Swedish study when they only gave some employees a shorter work week. There was a lot of resentment, and profits went down.
Well, interestingly, I mean, I'm sure that there would be a big debate around that on its own, and you do reference this a little in your op-ed, and your op-ed certainly elicited a very spirited debate online. But getting back to sort of the initial premise, how do you respond to those who insist that this really all is related, that the real threat to jobs remains outsourcing? How do you address that point of view?
Well, easy. You just say, look at the numbers. If you go to unbiased, nonpartisan statistics, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you can just see in the numbers what's going on. The Ball State University study of those numbers shows that 88% of job loss over the last decade has been because of automation, intelligent automation, not because of outsourcing or other reasons. And there are lots of studies that show that in the future it's going to be increasingly that way. One study, for instance, was done by Gartner, a technology research firm. It shows that within the next 10 to 15 years, a third of our jobs that we have now will be automated. That's a lot. That's 33% more than what we have now. And that's just one study. There are numerous studies. The most famous one is by Brynildson and McAfee, two MIT economists. They put out a pretty notable study in 2013 saying pretty much the same thing, but they said about 45% of all jobs will disappear.
So if I understood correctly, another potential solution to that kind of situation is a universal basic income. Again, I think there's a lot of critics to that, like, why pay people to do nothing is one way to think about that. How do you respond to that question? And what is the right way for us to think about that?
Yeah, well, this isn't as radical a proposition as it sounds to be, because first of all, it's a very old proposition. Thomas Paine, an American, was the first one to come up with the idea during the American Revolution, or just after actually, as a way to provide true equality in the new America. Paine wanted, and others of our founding fathers, wanted to get rid of the British aristocracy and that kind of system. So Paine proposed that to even things out, all men, and then the workers were men, upon the age of a majority, would get an amount of money equal to 1 year's pay, so that they could all have an equal chance at starting some business or setting themselves up. And along the way, there have been other people, some of them very conservative, who've seen this as a good way to not only provide for those that don't have and provide opportunity, but also to get rid of the complexities of welfare systems. Richard Nixon's a good example. He was a proponent of this. Charles Murray, who is a libertarian philosopher, wrote an article about this in 2013. And Milton Friedman, a conservative economist, also proposed this. So why is it not radical? Because really you're just swapping out welfare, a very complicated welfare system, for one thing, which is giving everybody enough money to put a roof over their head and food in their mouth, and then anything they earn above and beyond that they get to keep. So all of us get it. It's like Social Security. Nobody thinks that's bad because everybody has a buy-in. With UBI, Universal Basic Income, we all have a buy-in. We all get the money, and then we all get our earnings as well. And so it just ensures nobody starves, and also ensures that people who are displaced have time to retrain.
It's an interesting comparison, or your analogy, to Social Security. Do you think the current administration would consider adopting or something of this kind very broadly?
Well, I hope so. I think it's all about how the idea is pitched. I think if you compare it to Social Security and say this is just a Social Security for the rest of us, not just the elderly, then I think it sounds reasonable to even conservatives. And also if you bring in the fact that conservatives historically have supported this, and it's not just money for nothing. It's money for people who need the money and who are interested in working. There's always going to be some slackers, but most people want to work.
But playing devil's advocate, isn't it a disincentive to work? Isn't it a demotivator? Why should I work? I'm going to get paid.
Well, again, I can point to studies. Over in the Netherlands, they're already trying this UBI in large cities like Utrecht. And also, the whole country of Finland has just started it as of last year. And then we also have some cities trying it in Canada and in the United States. Oakland, the city of Oakland, California, is trying this. So we'll wait to see how it pans out. But what early results show is people aren't disincentivized. Most people want to work. They want to have something to get up out of bed for in the morning. They don't just want to sit around and drink beer and watch TV. So I will see. But my bet is on the fact that it'll be better. Right now, think about it. In a welfare system like, say, England's, you not only have to go through all this rigmarole to prove you're looking for work, but you have all this bureaucracy and all these bureaucrats checking on you all the time, and they're all paid, and it's very complicated. And then if you get a job and it pays less than your welfare check, too bad for you. You've got to take the job, and your income goes down instead of up. And this kind of UBI would resolve these kinds of problems.
So, I mean, this debate, the way you describe it, really has been going on for 200 years in this country or longer. I mean, just the conditions have changed, but I mean, this scenario that you were describing with disruptions and potential solutions is not new. It's just, the names and faces have changed, but the is that correct?
Sort of. I mean, the difference has been that we were able to find other solutions in previous industrial revolutions. In the second industrial revolution, that electricity and internal combustion engines, that displaced a lot of people. And there was a lot of short-term social unrest and violence. There were all kinds of industrial massacres and violent protests here in the United States, especially in coal mines and factories. And what resolved it was two things. First, the rise of labor unions, which took pressure off the situation because unions allowed workers to negotiate with and improve their conditions. The second was Teddy Roosevelt and his administration, who, by the way, were conservatives. Teddy Roosevelt in particular tried to get rid of abuses like child labor, or work days that were extremely long. 12-hour work days were reduced, and working 6-hour or 6-day weeks and so forth. That had a lot to do with his administration. So they had that. We so far don't have anything to meet the challenge.
Okay. So long term, the automation taking place is good. Short term, it's where we have some of these challenges. These short-term challenges, do you think that actually we could have an anti-technology revolution on our hands because of this, or people feel that way, that technology is bad instead of good?
Well, I think it depends whom you talk to, but I think definitely for a large part of America, automation, intelligent technology has produced a lot of heartache as well as some, opportunities, and it could very well result in violence and social disruption, because historically that's happened every single time. We need a pressure release valve on that. You can already see the desperation. It was a big, huge part of our election season last year. Part of the reason that people voted for the administration we have now is because they were desperate about the future job situation in America.
Let's take a break from some of my questions now and go to a few that we have received from the audience. We have one from Elizabeth asking, what do you think about robots' ability to make ethically based decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now it's not really very successful, but that was Elizabeth. They're working on this. All kinds of scientists are working on trying to give robots an ethical system. Especially robots who are going to drive our cars. That's a big issue, because if you have a self-driving car and you're about to get in an accident, the car has to decide whom to kill. If there's a fatal possibility there, that's a big deal. So far, it's very complex. Ethics are very complex, and so there's not been a huge amount of success in making an ethical system for robots, but they're working on it. They have managed to make robots that at least act like they have empathy and sympathy and certain emotions. A good example of that is you can Google a robot called Pepper. It's a Japanese social robot, and it can read your emotions, and it tries to make you happier, and it converses with you. So that's one of the 4 runners.
Well, sort of building on that, we have a question from Alex in Manhattan. And he asks, what is the role of education in preparing students for a world with job-stealing robots, as he says?
Yeah, I think preparing students who are more tech literate and tech savvy is very important, because the jobs of yesterday aren't coming back. We're not going to have coal miners getting new jobs. Trying to revive coal mining today is like trying to revive Kodak.
But that's exactly what
it's wrong.
We say is happening.
But it's
in
wrong.
This country.
Trying to revive Kodak in the age of digital photography is we would all agree useless. So is trying to revive coal mining, because already natural gas is so cheap. The market is making a decision to use natural gas. So I think people need to be trained better for the jobs that are coming, and I'd say a lot of us are going to need retraining and make it part of our lives.
Yeah, well, interestingly, because I mean, for students today, it's probably easier. As you were just going to say, what about for current workers today, someone who's 50, 60 years old? What do they do? How do they prepare for a world in which, with job-stealing robots?
Well, that's a hard one, because at 50 or 60, often you haven't got a lot of time left in the job market, and it's already difficult even before we had digital technology taking jobs. There was a lot of age discrimination. So there's that to consider. But also in terms of retraining, I'd say the same thing I say for young people. Be willing and open to retraining with technology, and try hard to keep up with it. Yeah. Don't just sit back and say, I don't want to use email, I don't want to use technology. It has no relevance to me.
It's hard
I'm
not
in that
to.
age group, by the way.
Not me. Here's another question from Sarah Jane on Long Island. You referenced a few industries like salespeople and accountants and so forth. what other industries will be affected by this? And are there some that really won't be affected? I mean, would that be a driver for people? You know, that if some won't be affected, you know?
Yeah, that's an excellent question too. Studies show that and if you just think about robotics and what they can do, what robots can do, the jobs that'll be most readily displaced, the ones that'll go away first, are going to be the jobs that are based on numbers, that have repetitive motions involved with them, or repetitive activities, things that are easily automated. So doing a factory line job has already been automated to a great extent. But stuff like, I mentioned accounting because that's number-based, and it is repetitive, filling in boxes on tax forms and making decisions between what factor to put in and what factor to leave out. The stuff that's going to be harder to replace are jobs that have to do with creativity, person-to-person contact, personnel management, those things, anything with a lot of complexity and human emotions, those will be hard to displace. So teachers are pretty safe right now. So are managers and novelists and so forth.
So machines write newspaper articles, but not books yet.
Well, that's being worked on too. But I've read you can actually go online and read some poetry written by computers, by AI programs. If you just Google poetry written by AI, you'll find some, and it's not very good.
Here's another question from Joe in South Bend, Indiana. And Joe asks, as people become unemployed, presumably by technology, do you think they will speak up against the use of robots?
Yeah, Joe, I think that a new Luddite revolution is possible. I think it depends on how much we do to help people who are getting displaced. The more people suffer, the more likely they are to have some kind of rebellion against robotics. I think that we're not going to rebel against using our laptops because those things we like. But I mentioned the Luddite rebellion. That was Ned Ludd led a group of rebels in the early 1800s who went around smashing automated weaving looms, and in the hope that they could stop this revolution, and it didn't work. But it won't work now either, but it could happen.
Okay. Well, so, I guess like with a lot of things, we're going to not like the technology. We think it's taking something away from us, but if it's making our life more convenient or we like it, interesting. Here's another question from Joshua. He is outside the country, and he asks, do you think advanced robots will have a radical revolution on humanity?
Mm-hmm.
That's
called the Terminator Scenario in a lot of corners. Reference the Terminator movies. Most computer scientists I've talked to and read articles, and whose articles I've read, think that's not going to happen for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's unlikely that robots will get that smart that fast that we wouldn't recognize that there might be some problems coming, and there would be all kinds of warnings, and we have we can build fail-safes into our coding. So most computer scientists don't think that's a very likely scenario.
Okay, well, all the things we've discussed here today, and some, the long-term eventualities seem like they're coming. The short-term solutions to try to get us through these pain points, are they imminent? Will some of these short-term proposals, could they happen? And if they could happen, is it something that could happen relatively soon, or how imminent would these things be if they can happen at all?
Well, universal basic income's already happening in experimental basis around the world in industrialized countries. Micro taxes such as the one I recommended, and by the way, that idea is originally Jaron Lanier's idea. He's a Silicon Valley coder and writer. But that hasn't happened yet, but it's being talked about a lot. Of course, it's being resisted by companies like Facebook and Google for good reasons in their opinion. So, but I think all of these ideas are doable. It's about political will and social will, and I think that's going to be the big question. Okay.
Well, I think that's the end of our questions. So I'd like to thank you again very much for your time, Kevin. It was a great conversation, and thank the audience very much for their participation and their questions. And if there are any other questions, if you want to continue to put them in the comments section, we'll see if we can get Kevin to answer a few more over time. Thank you.